Have you ever wondered what really hides inside a lighthouse when the beacon suddenly goes dark? Imagine being trapped miles from shore, cut off from the world, with nothing but crashing waves and a spiral staircase that seems to echo footsteps that aren't yours. Out there, in the silence, reality bends. Objects appear where they shouldn't. Doors slam when no one is near. And sometimes, you hear voices that were never human to begin with. These aren't ghost stories made up to scare children. These are chilling accounts from real people who swore they would never set foot in a lighthouse again. Men who saw hands reaching out of walls. Couples who realized they were being hunted on the cliffs. Veterans of the sea who came back broken, insisting that some places should be left alone forever. Welcome to the price paid. If you love true horror, if you crave stories that will crawl under your skin and stay there long after the video ends, make sure you subscribe right now. Because tonight, we're about to enter 3 lighthouses you will wish had never been built. My cousin Nate is not the type of man who embellishes stories. He has served in the Coast Guard for years, and if you know him, you know he is a grounded, no-nonsense kind of guy. He likes order, he likes routine, and he has never been one for superstitions or tales of the supernatural. That is why the story he told me about what happened to him in 2017 still sends chills down my spine. He told me more than once, and each retelling matched the last in every disturbing detail. At the time, Nate was sent on a maintenance assignment to a remote lighthouse off the coast of Maine known as Matinus Rock. The place was nothing more than a jagged slab of stone rising out of the sea, crowned by a solitary lighthouse and a small auxiliary shed. There were no docks, no nearby towns, no power lines, and no plumbing. You could only reach it by helicopter or by boat when the sea was calm. The beacon was automated, but like all machines, it required inspection and upkeep, so once a year, the Coast Guard would send someone out to check it. Usually these trips were done alone, but due to a series of unusual electrical failures the year before, Command decided to send 2 men this time. Nate was paired with another officer, Russell. The first few days were uneventful in the way isolation often is. The wind howled, the ocean foamed against the rocks, and the 2 men passed their days climbing the spiral staircase to test the beacon, refilling the generator with diesel, scraping layers of salt from the corroded interior metal, and tightening bolts that seemed to always be rusting. At night, they played cards, ate bland rations, and read until they fell asleep. It was monotonous, but manageable. Then, on the 4th night, something happened that Nate still cannot explain. Around 2 in the morning, he woke up feeling strange. He said it was not pain, not sickness, but a heaviness in the air, like the pressure you feel before a thunderstorm. Only when he glanced out the window, the sky was clear. The stars were sharp and cold, and the night was perfectly still. But the one thing that was not as it should have been was the light. The sweeping beam of the beacon was gone. The light of a lighthouse is its sole purpose, and for it to fail was serious. Nate immediately woke Russell, and the 2 of them climbed the narrow staircase up to the beacon room. The gears that rotated the beam were still moving, but something was blocking the mechanism. Jammed deep into the gears was a large piece of fabric, damp and heavy, covered in moss and slime. It reeked of mildew and rotting seaweed like it had just been dredged from the ocean floor. There was no logical explanation. The doors were locked, the windows sealed, and the only way up was the staircase they had just climbed. They pulled the cloth free, tossed it outside into the wind, and returned to bed unsettled but determined to think of it as some bizarre accident. The following night, the exact same thing happened. Again, just past 2, Nate awoke to the absence of the sweeping light. Again, they climbed the stairs, only to find the gears obstructed. But this time, the cloth was different. It was not a blanket, but a scarf. Small and frayed, red in color, dripping with briny water, crusted with tiny sea creatures, as if it had been lying on the ocean floor for years, before somehow appearing in their sealed beacon room. That was the moment when unease became dread. From then on, they barricaded the stairwell each night, stacking crates at the bottom, locking both the beacon room and their quarters. But the sense that something was with them never went away. Russell began acting strangely. He muttered in his sleep, whispered as if speaking to someone in the dark corners of the room. One night, Nate heard him murmuring, turned, and found him staring at the window, saying he had seen a figure on the rocks below, just barely visible in the sweep of the light before it vanished. By the 9th night, Russell had stopped sleeping altogether. He sat for hours, eyes fixed on the staircase, muttering about noises inside the walls. And then came the footsteps, slow, deliberate, one after another, descending the spiral staircase above them. Both men froze. Neither had moved, yet the creaking continued until it stopped in a silence even heavier than before. That night they pushed furniture against their door, and slept with knives beneath their pillows. The 11th night brought the worst of it. The beacon once again failed, and when they reached the top, the heavy metal door was swung wide open as if it had been kicked in. The wind howled through the chamber. The bulb had been removed, unscrewed by force, and placed upright in the center of the room. That bulb was industrial grade, impossible to casually twist loose. Yet there it stood like some kind of offering. As Nate stood there, heart racing, he felt something brush against his back, cold, deliberate, like the touch of a hand. He spun, but nothing was there. Russell, pale as ash, pointed to the wall, swearing he had seen a hand emerge from the bricks themselves. They ran. They locked themselves in their room. Nate did not sleep at all that night, while Russell rocked back and forth whispering to an invisible presence. At dawn, Nate used the emergency satellite phone to request immediate pickup, reporting a mechanical failure. By that afternoon, a boat arrived. But the strangest part came when the crew asked them about the distress call they had received at 2:12 a.m. Nate had never made such a call. The crew said the message was garbled, full of static, but a voice had come through saying someone else was there with them. Russell never spoke on the ride back. Within months, he quit the Coast Guard altogether and never discussed Matinas Rock again. Nate still works maintenance assignments but refuses to ever set foot on that lighthouse. He told me once, quietly, that he is not sure whether what happened was human, ghostly, or something far worse. But he is certain of one thing. If the light of Matinas Rock ever goes dark again, he will not be the one to turn it back on. The world was in lockdown, and like so many others, I was losing my grip on routine. Nights blurred into days, and the silence of my small apartment became unbearable. I had been spending hours on my phone, scrolling endlessly, chatting with strangers online, and trying to distract myself with movies I had already seen. That was when I started talking with Sophia, a girl I'd followed on Instagram for years. She was local, just a short drive away, and within days of messaging, she suggested we meet in person. We both craved something beyond the suffocating walls of quarantine. When I picked her up, she was laughing, confident, and brimming with restless energy. She had that rebellious streak, the kind of girl who treated fences and locked gates as minor inconveniences. She suggested we head to Montauk, all the way out on the eastern tip of Long Island, where the famous lighthouse stood overlooking the Atlantic. It was well past sunset, and technically the grounds were closed, but she shrugged it off, saying she had been there at night before, never once encountered security. The drive itself felt strange, like we were moving farther and farther from reality. Streetlights grew scarce, houses disappeared, and soon the only illumination came from the pale sweep of the moon over the darkened sea. When we arrived, the parking lot was deserted. No cars, no guards, not even the sound of traffic. Just the lighthouse towering above, its beam cutting across the cliffs like a knife. We sat for a while, sipping hard seltzers and talking, but my eyes kept drifting to the massive silhouette of the lighthouse. There was something liminal about it, the way it rose into the night sky, an ancient guardian that seemed both protective and menacing. Sophia grabbed her flashlight and motioned for me to follow. She led us off the paved path, down toward the cliffs where rocks jutted out in jagged trails. This was the Cliff Walk, a narrow route that hugged the edge of the land, overlooking the black waves crashing far below. The only light we had came from our phones. The air smelled of salt and wet stone. Every step echoed unnaturally loud, as if the rocks themselves were amplifying our presence. Then Sophia stopped and whispered my name. I turned to see her flashlight beam fixed on a figure standing a short distance behind us. He was tall, his face hidden under the hood of a coat. The beam of our lights revealed little, only that his clothes were damp and his posture unnerving. I called out, asking if he worked there, if he was security, but he did not answer. He just stood there, motionless. My stomach twisted. The silence was worse than a threat. Finally he spoke, his voice flat and unsettling. He asked if we wanted to buy some coke. Relief did not come with the revelation. If anything, it made everything worse. He was not security, not someone with a reason to be there. He was just a stranger, in the middle of the night, in a place no one else should have been. I told him no, quickly, and urged Sophia to keep walking. She went ahead, and I kept myself between her and the man as we continued down the rocks. But every time I glanced back, he was there. Not gaining on us, not falling behind, just following at the same steady pace. The tension became unbearable. Every crunch of gravel beneath our shoes sounded louder, and the crashing of the ocean felt distant compared to the weight of his footsteps behind us. When we finally reached the end of the cliff walk, we cut across the grass toward the parking lot, our pace quickening. That was when he spoke again, calling out to us, asking where we were going. We did not answer. We walked faster, almost running. And then from behind us, 2 more figures emerged from the darkness. They came from the opposite side of the cliff path, their silhouettes merging with the shadows until they were suddenly close. There were 3 of them now, closing in on us. My pulse hammered in my ears. Running outright would have triggered a chase, so we kept moving fast but controlled, side by side, all the while hearing their footsteps following in sync. By the time we reached the car, the 3 men were only yards away. We scrambled inside, locking the doors just as 2 of them yanked at the handles. The third slammed a fist against the window, sending a shock through my chest. I threw the car into reverse, heart pounding, backing out as they kicked at the panels and slapped the glass. The headlights caught their faces for only a second. Blank, expressionless, predatory. They did not give chase once the car moved, but they stood there in the rearview mirror, still watching as I sped out of the lot. The ride back was silent. Both of us were shaking, our adrenaline drained to a hollow dread. Neither of us had spoken about what might have happened if we had been slower, if the car had not started, if the doors had not locked in time. It was too close, too real. To this day, I cannot explain who they were or why they chose us. My friends say it was probably a gang, maybe just drug dealers trying to intimidate us. But I know what I felt in those moments. It was not random. It was not chance. It felt like we had wandered somewhere we were never meant to be and something was waiting for us. Sophie and I stayed in touch after that, but neither of us has ever gone back to Montauk. The lighthouse may still stand there, its lights sweeping dutifully across the water. But for me, it will always be the place where the night came alive with hunters who almost caught us. Ian was the kind of man whose life had been carved out by the sea. Decades of work in marine salvage and coastal construction had left him with a weathered face, thick hands, and the calm confidence of someone who had faced countless storms. He had dived in freezing waters, welded steel in raging winds, and repaired engines that seemed impossible to fix. He was not the sort to exaggerate, and he certainly was not the sort to be rattled by an empty building. So when he told his story, I listened. Not once did I doubt him. In 2013, Ian was hired by a small county in Washington state to inspect an old decommissioned lighthouse. It was remote, perched on a rock island far off the mainland, the kind of place with no docks, no paths, no sign that people had set foot there in years. Developers wanted to tear it down, historians wanted to preserve it, and no one wanted to pay the cost either way. Ian's job was simple: go alone, walk through the structure, and write up a report on whether it was worth saving. He had done jobs like this dozens of times, and he packed light. Food for 4 days, a sleeping bag, a toolkit, and a marine radio to call for pickup when it was over. When the Coast Guard boat dropped him off at the rocky ledge, he remembered thinking how quiet the place felt. Not just quiet in the way remote places are, but hollow, like the air itself was holding its breath. The lighthouse towered 50 feet above, its iron railing rusted, its windows clouded with grime. Inside, the air smelled of salt, metal, and decay. He checked the beams, the stairs, the floors. Everything seemed structurally intact. The second floor was empty, except for some corroded cabinets, and the third held a small sleeping quarter long abandoned. He rolled out a sleeping bag on the ground floor near the generator shed, where the wind could not reach. That first night, he barely slept. The silence pressed in on him. There were no gulls, no insects, not even the sound of waves slapping against the rocks. It was unnatural, he said, like the whole world had shut itself off. By morning, a thick fog had rolled in, so heavy that when he looked out the window, the world was nothing but a wall of white. He had seen fog before, but never like this. It looked solid, as if it could swallow him whole. On the second day, while climbing the spiral staircase to the beacon room, he noticed something strange. Halfway up was a maintenance closet built into the wall. The day before, it had been sealed tight. Hinges rusted so badly, it refused to open. But now it was ajar by an inch. Inside, in the shadowed corner, sat a wooden box. It was small, the size of a lunchbox, swollen with moisture, and covered in moss as if it had been submerged underwater for years. He shut the door quickly, deciding to note it for the report but not to touch it. That night, something woke him. He could not say what at first. It was not a sound, but the absence of sound, as though even the wind had died. Then came the footsteps, slow, deliberate, metallic, rising upward through the staircase above him, not descending, but climbing toward the beacon. He lay frozen, flashlight clutched in his hand. eyes fixed on the stairwell entrance. The sound stopped, leaving a silence that was somehow even worse. By the third day, the box had moved. It was no longer inside the closet, but sitting halfway out into the stairwell, as if someone had dragged it forward. This time, he picked it up. The wood was bloated, the lid nailed shut, and it was heavier than it looked. He left it at the base of the stairs and went outside, desperate for air. That was when he saw the footprints. They were bare, wet human footprints in the dirt. Not boots, not shoes, but feet. They led from the north side of the lighthouse toward the edge of the cliff, and then they stopped. No return path. Just a dozen impressions ending at a sheer drop into the sea. He said he stared at them for a long time, trying to rationalize what he was seeing, before locking every door and wedging the stairwell shut with an iron pipe. That night was worse. Around 1:30, the door to the beacon slammed shut, with such force that dust rained down from the ceiling. Then came the knocking. 3 slow knocks. Not on the door, not on the windows, but from inside the wall of the tower, as if something was standing just behind the brick. He lay still, refusing to move, heart pounding until the sound finally stopped. In the morning, the closet door was wide open and the box was gone. That was when he called for extraction, claiming a medical issue. They told him to wait a few hours, but the fog only thickened. He sat by the ledge for nearly 7 hours, unable to see more than a few feet in front of him. The sun began to set and the temperature dropped. That was when he heard it again. Footsteps on the gravel, just behind him. He spun around, but there was nothing but fog. Still, he could feel it. The presence, moving closer, unseen. He ran to the cliff's edge and stayed there until the distant horn of the rescue boat finally pierced the night. When the crew pulled him aboard, they asked why he looked so pale, why his hands shook, as if he had seen a ghost. He told them the lighthouse was unsafe, that it should be sealed off. His official report claimed the structure was compromised, but he never mentioned the box, the footprints, or the knocking. Not once. Within a year, he stopped fieldwork entirely, choosing instead to retire from the sea. When I asked him later why, he looked me dead in the eyes and said only this: some places are not meant for people. They demand silence. They demand to be left alone. And sometimes, he said, you can feel it in your bones when you are trespassing somewhere that does not belong to the living. When you listen to these stories, one by one, it is tempting to treat them as isolated incidents. A strange malfunction here, a near encounter with strangers there, a veteran worker rattled by isolation in an abandoned tower. But when you step back, when you connect the details and let them settle in your mind, you realize that all of these experiences circle around the same truths. The lighthouse, a symbol of safety, a beacon of human defiance against the dark sea, becomes something else entirely when the light falters. It becomes a place where human presence feels unnatural, where the structure itself seems to resist being occupied. Think about Nate and Russell on Matinus Rock. At first, it was simple mechanical confusion, scraps of fabric where they did not belong. But with each night, the fabric grew more personal, the phenomena more invasive, until Russell's mind seemed to collapse under the pressure. The light was sabotaged, the walls themselves became alive, and voices bled into transmissions that should have been silent. Was it madness born of isolation, or was the lighthouse itself, battered by storms and salted air, housing something older and unseen that did not want him there? Now consider the night at Montauk. That story had no ghosts, no spectral hands pushing through stone, no mysterious objects appearing from the sea. Instead, it revealed the terror of people who do not belong, lurking where no one expects them to be. 3 men appearing out of the shadows, closing in with blank expressions like predators circling prey. There's something primal about that kind of fear. The darkness does not need the supernatural to make your pulse quicken. Sometimes, people are the horror, and their silence, their persistence, their intrusion into a place that should have been deserted is enough to make your blood run cold. The light of Montauk still sweeps the cliffs, but for those 2 who survived that night, it will always be a reminder that danger does not need to be a ghost to be real. Then there is Ian, the seasoned professional who had seen everything the ocean could throw at him. He had built his life on rationality, on steel and tools, and the confidence that nothing could shake him. Yet in that decommissioned lighthouse, surrounded by fog that swallowed the world, he heard footsteps where there should have been none, saw footprints that led only to the sea, and found a box that seemed to exist for no purpose other than to unsettle. When he left, he abandoned the career that defined him, muttering only that some places must remain untouched. That is not the voice of a man who spooked himself in the dark. That is the voice of someone who knew he had crossed into a place not meant for the living. What binds these stories together is not the specifics of the encounters, but the theme of intrusion. Each lighthouse became hostile not because of what was seen, but because of what was not meant to be there. The sea delivered objects into gears that should have remained clean. Strangers invaded a place meant to stand silent at night. Footprints appeared where no one had come ashore. Each story is a reminder that the most terrifying moments often come, not from what we understand, but from what we cannot. The ocean has always been humanity's frontier, vast and unforgiving. The lighthouse stands at the edge of that frontier, a fragile human attempt to claim control. But what if that claim is not welcome? What if the beam of light we send out into the night does more than guide ships? What if it signals something else, draws it closer, invites it into the tower where it does not belong? The truth is, the terror of these stories lingers not because of gore or monsters, but because of how possible they feel. The details are too specific, too lived in, too grounded in reality. A Coast Guard officer does not invent hands and walls. A young couple does not conjure up 3 silent stalkers. A veteran diver does not give up his life's work over nothing. These are not just stories. They are fragments of truth told by people who wish desperately that they could forget. And so when we hear them, when we let them seep into our imagination, we are left with the unsettling conclusion that the most dangerous thing about a lighthouse is not what you see in its sweeping light, but what waits in the darkness between rotations. Lighthouses were meant to be symbols of safety, guardians of the sea guiding sailors through storms and darkness. But the stories you have just heard remind us that sometimes those very beacons stand on the edge of something else, something we are not meant to see. 3 very different accounts, told by 3 very different people, all lead to the same chilling conclusion. There are places where human presence feels unwelcome, and the deeper we stay in them, the more the darkness begins to push back. Nate and Russell discovered what happens when the light that is supposed to protect becomes corrupted by something unseen. They did everything right. They locked doors, secured stairwells, kept weapons close at hand, but no amount of preparation could stop the strange objects from appearing inside sealed rooms, or the voices echoing through static at impossible hours. Their story is a reminder that sometimes, even the most disciplined minds can crumble when confronted with forces that defy explanation. The lesson is clear. When something is persistently wrong in a place where it should not be, it is safer to retreat than to try to fight it. The couple at Montauk faced no ghosts, but their terror was no less real. They learned what it means to be stalked by strangers in a place that should have been empty. Human danger, quiet and deliberate, can be more horrifying than any apparition. Their survival came from making the right choices, staying calm, refusing to run too soon, locking the car in time. It teaches us that when confronted with potential violence, panic only feeds the threat. Awareness, composure, and a swift exit can mean the difference between survival and disaster. Ian's story in the abandoned Washington lighthouse is perhaps the most unsettling of all. A man who had faced the sea for decades, a man hardened by work that demanded discipline and courage, walked away from his entire career after only 3 days on that island. He encountered no one he could prove existed, but he saw evidence, a box, footprints, sounds within walls that told him he was not alone. He left not because of fear alone, but because he understood something fundamental. Some places are not meant for us. And when the environment itself begins to resist your presence, you listen, you leave. Together, these stories tell us that courage is not about staying when everything inside you says to run. Courage is recognizing danger, even when it hides behind the ordinary, and having the will to walk away. It is better to abandon a job, an adventure, or even a long-held belief than to stay in a situation that could consume you. So what should we do when faced with the unknown? Trust your instincts. Respect isolation. Understand that not every mystery is meant to be solved, and not every place is meant to be occupied. Sometimes survival depends not on fighting, but on listening to that voice inside that says, leave now. If these stories unsettled you, if they made you question what lingers in the shadows between the sweeps of a lighthouse beam, then you are exactly where you belong. This is just the beginning. There are countless more stories waiting to be told, each darker than the last. So join us, subscribe to The Price Paid, and step deeper into the darkness with us. Because the scariest stories are not legends. They are true, and they are waiting for you.